Hi, I'm Andrew. Welcome to One Shots Tavern, a TTRPG podcast where we seek out new ways to tell your stories through different systems and games. And today we are joined by Colin of By Odin's Beard RPG, creator of Runecairn, and We Dealin' led. Colin, thank you so much for being here with me today. I am really excited to get into a lot of your work and hear your story and stuff.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Glad to talk about role-playing games.
Absolutely. Help me out. When did you launch the Runecairn Warden Saga Kickstarter? Was that like a year
So that
ago?
was no, so that was January of this
Oh,
year.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, so this was actually Runecairn Warden Saga remastered.
Right.
So the first version of Runecairn Warden Saga came out in 2022.
Okay.
And that was a co-publication with Exalted Funeral.
hmm
And then I wanted to do an updated version like that I would fully publish myself. So that's what I
Okay.
did with remastered.
Yeah. So let's wind back the clock. Runecairn, your first bigger production, or what was your first foray into the publishing space?
I did a two 5e adventures back in 2019. I released the first one. It's called The Howling Caverns, and it was a horror adventure inspired by Ravenloft.
Okay.
That started out as me running a Ravenloft-like adventure for my players, and then I packaged it up. I was running in Pathfinder then,
hmm
but I packaged it up as 5e, and then published that first, and then I did a print run. Um, and then I did a sequel to that called Colossus Wake. Same world, but slightly different focus. It was it was inspired by Shadow of the Colossus,
Yeah.
the video game.
Very cool.
Uh, yeah, and then from there, that's kind of where I've left 5e and moved over into carrying it into the odd systems or inspired or hacked systems like Runecairn, and that's where I designed Runecairn, my own system.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mentioned a little bit of our story before we started recording, but getting into the space really, I mean, we went full like 2 feet first kind of thing out
Yeah.
of what we knew into this greater world of RPGs. So we're fairly fresh in it all. So hearing terms like OSR and NSR and like a lot of these games that have had actually a decent history
hmm
in this space and in the hobby, like Cairn and Into the Odd, and especially like even Knave, I had heard these names for so long
hmm
before I ever picked up the book and actually read about them. For you getting into that space, having come from more of that WotC bubble, what
hmm
was it like not only just as a player and running games stepping into that space, like for
hmm
you as but also as a designer and deciding, actually I think this is the space that I want to pursue designing and creating something new.
My journey into NSR and OSR started with a lot of people, like I think in a similar way to a lot of people with Questing Beast and Ben Milton on YouTube.
Yeah.
So he's definitely like a gateway into non 5e stuff or even non WotC stuff. So I wanted I had it in my head that I wanted to do a Dark Souls role playing game. And I wanted to find the right system for it because I knew 5e was probably going to be a bit too cumbersome,
Yeah,
uh,
you're too
bit too much going
powerful.
on. Yeah,
You
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, you need to be you need to be a little guy against unstoppable forces.
exactly.
So that kind of led me into different OSR and like old school style systems. I thought about doing old school essentials. So that's more of a stripped down version of like classic Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
But even then that had a bit too many moving parts. So the Karen caught my eye and the cover caught my eye first of
Yeah.
all because it's such a stunning cover,
I
really evocative.
yeah, even in so I like I mentioned, I launched a game called Battle School and I did all of it in
hmm
pixel art and it's all black and
hmm
white. And I was like,
Cool.
because especially I'd seen covers like Karen and I'd
Yeah.
seen a lot of this like 80s retro vibe. And it just,
hmm
especially in that zine format, it just does something else. Like it does
Yeah.
something special. And to bat, it's cheaper to print black and
Yeah.
white.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
So you get
man,
the
I
yeah.
I loved I love seeing Karen, and I hadn't ever really dove into it, and then I saw Into the Odd come out and
Mhm.
like all of I'm blanking on the name of the artist that they used all that art, the sci-fi art for. like I had seen their art for years,
Mhm.
floating around, and I saw it was all on this game, and I'm like, oh, I need to know more about this. I watched some
Yeah.
actual plays, and that was still like back when I was mostly insular to 5e
Mhm.
and D and D, and so I didn't really ingest the system too much. I was like, ah, it's really loosey goosey, whatever. Like I like my crunch, which is not how I talk really anymore at all.
Yeah.
Um, but then, I was like, "Okay, cool," and then I moved on. And then, in the last few years, I've just heard so much more about them, and then obviously backing Runecairn, having heard about it for a while, just by reputation, since you first launched. I was like, 1, the cover's beautiful. I'd seen the previous version of Warden Saga before the remaster, and I was like, "That's cool." And then I was
Yeah.
familiar with Crom as an artist. As you can tell, I am
Yeah.
drawn to books by art.
Yeah.
Um
Awesome.
and, I was just like, "This is so dope." So, for our listeners who are not familiar with it, because I have had the pleasure of
Mhm.
reading through the book, um,
Mhm.
give me the con pitch, right? Just the person that just
Mhm.
lingers a little bit long in your booth.
Yeah.
They clearly wanna know more.
Yeah.
Hit me.
So Runecairn's a two-player Norse fantasy Souls-like TTRPG. So it's set in a world of Norse mythology based around the Viking Age, so like about 900 to about 1200. And you play an adventurer who's woken up in this new world, who's lived a life, but now has been reborn into this world, and a world after Ragnarok, where the previous world has been destroyed, the gods are dead or missing, and everything's been reborn into this like new green wilderness that still has kind of traces of the old world left behind. So you have to navigate this new world, and basically forge your own fate and forge your own um, uh, kind of purpose, because what you were before uh, doesn't like no longer matters. Now you can choose what you want to do for yourself because you're kind of free of the skein of fate, and you could carve it for yourself to carve your own fate.
That's awesome. I love that. And I remember, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but, Spencer Campbell made his game,
Hmm.
Rune, a
Hmm.
solo Dark Souls game. I that was one of the
Yeah.
first games that I took the plunge into, the solo RPGing
Hmm.
space, and I loved being able to play in his world of Oberon and just kind of experience that gameplay of what I thought was unique to only video games. But,
Hmm.
in, as if time had been rewound and, the game had came first.
Yeah.
And even reading through Runecairn, just like all of the obvious inspiration is, it takes on a life of its own. I think that wonder, at least for me, when I first got into RPGs, it was in high school, and I was like, "Wait, I can do anything?" Like, it's like
Hmm.
those worlds that I care so much about, but I can do anything. And it kind of brought me back to that because it was a play experience that I don't often get at the table,
Hmm.
that I have had somewhere else, but I couldn't do anything. And so, like, that idea of a two-player experience that's balanced for that, that's
Hmm.
designed for that kind of intimate one-to-one relationship is something that's deeply interesting to me. Because even and this is absolutely zero shade to Spencer's work, I'm a huge fan, but the only thing that I didn't love about Rune was that I was alone. Because
Hmm.
I play games to be with people, but
Yeah.
you don't get that feeling of a Dark Souls kind of environment with, 6 adventurers that can all, drop a sun on their enemy,
Yeah.
and, like, that's terribly uninteresting, to
Yeah.
creating tone. A big thing that I talk about is the, very common saying of boundaries creating the environment for creativity, right? So, like, for
Hmm.
you, when it came to, early on with Runecairn, because this was a remaster, but early on when
Hmm.
you were starting on this project, what were some of those intentional things that you set for yourself, that really help you build it to what it is today?
I think the like building on Karen and the what Karen and Into the Odd as well have are the are principles that kind of are foundational to the game. like principles for the players, principles for the warden, and what I added, principles for the world.
Hmm.
So to give a bit of like lore and flavor into that. But that kind of determines how you navigate the world and as the warden or as a player. Um, so like fiction first, like stuff that like common sense stuff. So like if something is impossible, then you just can't do it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how well you roll the dice.
But I got a 20.
And yeah, yeah, exactly. And if something is like if something makes sense, then you don't have to roll for it.
Right.
It just happens. That sort of stuff. And I think that that helps focus things a lot. Um, and while I'm not going for realism, it helps speed things along. You don't have to worry about the minutia of rules and mechanics. Um, like they're there to kind of make a better experience and facilitate a better experience. And it's not just rolling the dice that's important. It's like kind of what the story, like what story you create together. That's why it's cool having like one player and one GM in that you're kind of crafting that story together. Um, and then like obviously I was taking a lot of inspiration from Dark Souls, so I wanted to have those. I wanted it to feel a bit like that. And that's where like the principles of the world come in, where like um mystery, like there's mystery and danger everywhere, and like some secrets you'll never figure out, like some secrets have no answer. And like if you fail trying it one way, then try a different way, or come back later, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean when I was reading through it, I think that some of the stuff that stood out to me was the places where you went into to like lots of detail and complexity were often,
Hmm.
always in favor of the story and the world building, but you also left, like you're saying, so much up to vibes, just
Yeah.
the feeling of it. And I think
Hmm.
that that is, especially at a table of, let's say, like 4 to 6 players, that is
Hmm.
so hard to do because we're all using different touchstones for the kind of
Hmm.
fantasy we might be playing or whatever genre. We might
Hmm.
be not familiar with other touchstones that the GM is trying to pull from. But I think that like in those few times that I back in the day ran like a one-on-one session when I was first trying
Hmm.
that out, I was like, what if I just like did a one-off with one player and
Hmm.
just tried to do stuff
Yeah.
that level of like just personal, for lack of a better term, intimacy of just like we're
Hmm.
talking about this thing right now. I care about your character. I'm invested
Yeah.
in your story and I'm here to
Hmm.
facilitate that. Those were the one of like some of the most special moments I've had at the table, with
Hmm.
friends that it was a deepening of that relationship, but it was also so easy for us to find those touchstones because you're
Hmm.
not dealing with a crowd, you're just dealing with one person. I want to hear more about your ideas essentially around a post-apocalyptic Norse setting, right? Like
Yeah.
I've always heard about like Ragnarok is coming and like
Yeah.
the doom is nigh, but the
Yeah.
doom's already happened. So, like,
Yeah.
what
So
was the thought behind that, and what are some of your favorite things you did with that?
yeah, I didn't want it to be like there are a lot of like raw Viking blood and guts games out there. And so I didn't like I wanted you to be able to play that game if that's what game you want to play.
Mhm.
But it's also like a bit more pastoral, a bit more contemplative and explorational. So kind of taking some like tonal inspiration from Dark Souls where it's like it's a world on the decline, but for my world, it's like it's a new world. So because like because the ruins of the old world everywhere, and there are like remnants of the old world. So you're navigating this like green new world, and like you don't know like where things sit anymore. Like you don't know the power structure. Like before there were gods and there were like Jotun. Um and there were like terrific monsters. but are they still alive? Are they still out there? Like so things are up in the air. So it's like a new experience. You're also like living a new life.
Yeah.
So your past life, you have memories of it, like memory fragments of it, depending on kind of how you approach the character. So it's like experiencing a new world, and like it's more about exploration.
Hmm.
Um, but also like because like most role-playing games are post-apocalyptic in some way or
Right.
another, like delving through ancient civilizations and going
Yeah.
into dungeons and that sort of thing. So doing it this way, but having like having touchstones of the previous world and like how things have changed and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, even being like I'm not crazy into Norse stuff, but like I've
Hmm.
loved Norse fiction over the years. I really love the Norse mythology book that Neil Gaiman did. That's
Hmm.
phenomenal. And it really like
Yeah,
made me go like,
absolutely.
oh yeah, like this is just so interesting. I think one of the things when I was reading through your book was when you said that Jormungandr was dead, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Wait, what?" Like it was that moment of like, "Oh, I'm familiar with like a Norse book and like, oh, it's another Norse inspired setting," to
Hmm.
like being something special that was like different, and it added again that
Hmm.
wonder of like, "Wait a second. We're breaking the rules. Like we've established tone, we've established the
Hmm.
setting, but we're breaking some of those rules of like, well, wait, what does that mean
Yeah.
for this world? And what does that mean for me as a player? And do I, as as a character, have that understanding of what the implications of that could be? It just added a lot that I didn't expect from a game, that was another Norse game for lack of a
Hmm.
better
Yeah.
term.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm a huge fan of the setting and tone there. When it came to working on this, I mean, you've been doing this now for, you said 2022 was your initial launch?
So the first Runecairn book that I released was like a zine,
Yeah.
and that was in 21.
Okay.
So it
So you've
started
been
off as
going
like
for
a
3
series of
years on it.
yeah, yeah.
What's I mean, where are you, cuz I'm looking at my own launch coming up here,
Hmm.
and I'd love to talk a bit about like doing a remaster and
Hmm.
supporting a game and building a community around that game. um
Yeah,
and I'd love to hear where you feel like you've done really well and even places where you haven't, um purely for selfish reasons,
yeah,
but also just because I know a lot of our listeners are game designers and people working on stuff too, and I think that community building and not just putting games out into the universe and like just leaving them to be is ever
yeah,
what anyone wants to do, but it's definitely a fear for myself because I'm ready to go on to that next project. So,
yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear a bit about that from you.
So yeah, like the first version that I released, it was pretty short. It was just core rules and kind of some monsters, and like basically I took Cairn as a blueprint, and like like adapted that to a Norse fantasy setting and changed the rules and that sort of thing. So that was very much my template, was the original Cairn zine. But as I released additional content for it, or additional books for it, like advanced rules and an introductory dungeon, um, like the way I was thinking about it has changed, or the way I um, kind of express the game changed. So that's part of why I wanted to do like a collected edition as the original or as the original Runecairn Warden Saga. Put everything in one book, make some tweaks here and there. I was still learning layout at that point too, so I wanted to kind of um, have a better approach to layout, like a more unified approach. So that was how I viewed it. And then also like um, m- when I release a game, I see it, or I think of it as like a living thing, or like something that evolves. Because as I'm writing additional books or additional material, I'll think about what's in, like I'll refer back to the original book, I'll say, oh, well, this wasn't very clear, or
Yeah.
obvious, like there was an error here, that sort of thing. So it's like refining it, and making it clearer and easier to use. And then obviously like putting those updates back into PDFs. If I do a new print run, it'll have all the fixes in it, that sort of thing. So that's how I tend to approach things. Um, I know that's like some people like to have one finalized book and then that's it, and then it'll be it's like errata or
Yeah.
updates that you can like slip inside the book. Um, and I know that people don't like, and I don't like buying books multiple times.
Yeah.
Obviously, like yeah. So it's a balance of that. That's why when I wanted to do a remaster of Warden Saga, I wanted to make sure that this was going to be it for a while. Like
Yeah.
anything new would have to be in a separate book. So I wanted to make sure that everything was as clear as it could be, um, and all the errors were gone. But
Yeah.
obviously, like, however, like as many times as you go through it, as many times as you've got editors looking it over, there's always going to be stuff that you miss.
Always.
Especially like the real test is when you actually have it in print in your hand and you find an error. So that's when you'll find the most errors, is when you're actually looking through the final printed version,
Yeah.
which is very frustrating.
So, like I was saying, with the piece of like community building, and you've had this
Hmm.
game out now for 3 years in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Um, that that comes with it. Obviously, lots of people speaking into it, but also you were building a crowd and a community around this
Hmm.
game, that people that latched onto it early, that came back for more, that came back for those adventures that you were adding, and then
Hmm.
eventually additional additions and revisions and stuff. Um, what was your strategy on community building? Like, did you just start out with was the very first zine kickstarted, or was that just a thing you threw out into the ether? Or what was the
Yeah, that was just kind of like put it together and self-published it.
Okay.
Just did a small print run. I can't remember, like maybe 100 copies or
Mhm.
so. Um, because zines are, at least in the UK, zines are pretty economical
Yeah.
printing, especially in black and white. Um, so yeah, it was just that was kind of that initial release. Um, and I think what's because building off of Cairn, because Cairn was released with a CC by
Yeah.
SA license, so Creative Commons, you can use any of the text in it as long as you share it alike, like share it with the same
Mhm.
license. So that meant Runecairn was CC by SA as well. And Cairn had an SRD, like a system reference document website that had all the rules listed that you could access. So I built the same thing for Runecairn.
Mhm.
So Runecairn, the core rules are all available for free on the Runecairn website. So that was because I wanted people to take it and adapt it and hack it like I did with Karen, and to kind of like help build that community. Although I didn't really see it like as a community, I saw it like attaching myself to the Karen
Yeah.
community. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But yeah.
it's interesting how I've seen more in retrospect, because again, like coming in, not coming in late, but coming in after a lot of this stuff has been going for a while, seeing
Mhm.
those in indie space that have made those kind of choices to have their game very available. You know,
Mhm.
they're maybe they have a system agnostic version of it, and they're like, "Hey guys, play with it. Do whatever you
Mhm.
want and just run with it." And then, you get games more recently like Morkborg, where that comes out and people are like, "This is amazing and so cool."
Yeah.
And then everybody's making stuff for Morkborg for like, the last couple of years. And then it's like
Yeah.
you see, and so like I'm kind of discovering a lot of these lanes and like sub communities that have developed around these systems. And
Mhm.
it's fascinating to me, cuz again, like I've really mainly been from the D20 size games for so
Mhm.
long, and then jumping in and saying, "All right, like let's try out things that are, in OSR, or, whatever the heck the NSR is, or
Yeah.
like, and trying out games like the Blades in the Dark games and getting familiar with those. It's been Each has their own like little communities, but then like the
Mhm.
games that pop up sometimes, are able to do something wholly new, and, like build their own space within it, where they're
Yeah.
not just no shade to anybody that writes for Morkborg content, but it's like, another Morkborg module. It's its own
Mhm.
thing, and it kind of grows legs of its own. I definitely see Runecairn as doing a lot of that, not necessarily like at all saying like, screw Cairn and what they did. Like, obviously, you have
Yeah.
plenty of inspiration from that. I'm so early still, like, where technically
Mhm.
my book's not out yet. Like you can get it on itch right now, but I haven't printed it. Like getting, involved with distributors and publishers
Mhm.
and like jumping into that side of the business, like, that's
Mhm.
less like the fun community kind of like creative side. It's like a whole nother beast. So you've been doing that
Yeah.
now since you did that first little self-published run of Runecairn. What are some of the big pointers and or even just like for your own story, like what were some of the big leaps that you were able to take either in building connections or getting into that side of the business?
I think I'll start off with by saying like if your game's on itch, then your game is out and
Yeah.
people are able to play it. So that's a big first step, like getting something out there for people to look at and not necessarily to give feedback, but to start that kind of discussion.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. If your book's on itch, that means it's out
Step
there and
one.
you have released a book. So that's something to be proud of, absolutely. And like I itch and drive through RPG are the two things where I started releasing games. And I think what's important to kind of point out and what a lot of people might not realize is that it's so easy, like the barrier to entry is so low now
Yeah.
that anyone can make a book and anyone can make a game, which is amazing with the tools out there. And like you can get it in front of people's faces, pretty quickly on
Mhm.
drive through and really quickly on itch. So that's great. Like that's amazing to do. And there's so much out there, like there's so many people who are willing to share their knowledge and to help you along. And like there's vast amounts of information on how to self-publish and how to set up an itch page and how to format a zine, how to get things printed, like where to look for if you want to sell to shops and that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of things along the way that will help you like once like you don't have to do everything. You don't have to like reinvent the wheel at every step.
Yeah.
Like people who have gone ahead of you have done that already and they're willing to help you out. That's a great thing about like the indie TTRPG industry and I struggle to say community because that's a loaded term,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah, and I
But
mean,
yeah.
I've shared about that before on here, so listeners may have heard me say this a couple times, but, like, I think that when I look at the different creative spaces that I tried to break into over the years, because I,
Hmm.
did music, I did other stuff in art and whatnot, this space, to not use the word
Hmm.
community because there's a bunch of them
Yeah.
within it, this space
Yeah.
has been the most accessible when it
Hmm.
comes to people and like what you're saying with willingness to just talk about the
Yeah.
things they're passionate about, the things that they've worked hard on, or just to listen and hear about your project.
Yeah.
I remember like back, before streaming and stuff where it'd be like, you want to buy a CD? And people like, get away from me, you have the plague. Like it was that level
Yeah.
of like, don't tell me about your creative project. Whereas like in this, it's like people will actually want to know about it and they want to have that conversation. And I think it's because there's a like like an obviously there's the storytelling side of it because we're all nerds
Hmm.
that like telling these silly stories, but also there's
Yep.
like an intellectual, almost like philosophical conversation that goes on that we all love to engage in. That's
Mhm.
not sometimes people are like, there's wrong and right and blah blah, but
Yeah.
there's also so much of that nuance in this space because there's so many ways for us to facilitate storytelling. And,
Mhm.
each of these games builds on games that came before it because you can't copyright rules. And
Absolutely,
you
yeah.
get to use that as your benefit, in, telling the greater story of what these tables are able to facilitate. So
Mhm.
I'm a huge fan of Runecairn. I'm really excited to see what you're working on next. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Share anything with the world of what's coming up, what to look for, and how to find you and whatnot?
Sure, yeah. So Runecairn is kind of like, I've got 2 major or two kind of main games or like systems that I'm developing for now that I'm writing for. Um, so yeah, there's Runecairn and then there's We Deal in Lead, which is again a Cairn based or like a hack of Cairn, but it's my version of Stephen King's The Dark Tower.
Oh,
So that's yeah, so it's a Weird West gunslinger TTRPG.
okay.
Um, so yeah, I took the framework of Cairn and added gunslingers to it. So I had to kind of change the mechanics a little bit. But it's set in a kind of similar world to the Dark Tower, where it's like outside time and space, and you've got slip doors that lead to other worlds and other realities and other times. Um, but you can also go into other systems and other genres.
Okay.
So yeah, so I've had it's built to have
So it
Cairn
works
into
with
the odd.
Runecairn.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
I ran a group of gunslingers through the introductory adventure Beneath the Broken Sword,
Yeah,
and that was a lot of fun.
that's cool.
Just seeing how they break things and seeing how
It's
like
just the classic situation of like you're sitting there, you've got your action figures over here from
yep.
Marvel, and you got your ones from DC, and you're like, what if I put them together?
Exactly. So you've got gunslingers blowing the hell out of
Yeah.
like this demon from Dark Souls
Oh, that's
essentially.
so good.
Uh, yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the other like that. The one pillar is Runecairn, and then the other one is We Deal in Lead. So I'm working on a new We Deal in Lead adventure, because it's just the core book, and I've got an Ashcan like location zine called Omega City for We Deal in Lead. But I'm working on additional adventures for it. So I'll have one out hopefully by the end of the year. It's a bit slow going, just with all like the Warden Saga remaster took a lot more time than I expected.
Mhm.
So that's kind of in the rearview mirror now. Like I finished
Yeah.
fulfillment and everything. But I'm also working on a new system, like a totally different system, and this one's totally different from well, not totally like the core system is going to be similar, but the setting and genre is totally different.
Oh, very cool.
So yeah, it's a 90s set serial killer investigation game. So inspired by stuff like True Detective, Millennium, Twin Peaks,
Yeah.
Hellblazer, like the
Very
John
cool.
Constantine comics.
Yeah.
So it's that's called Midnight of the Century. And it's gonna be built on liminal horror, which is another Cairn hack.
Okay.
But the focus is gonna be investigation rather than combat. Um, so yeah, I'm excited about that. You play um, investigators hunting serial killers on a in a rain-soaked city on the edge of apocalypse. So set in
Solid
like
tagline.
96,
That's
97.
good.
Yeah.
Oh
So
man.
I'm in the research stages now and like building what the rules are going to look like and what sort of adventures they'll have, like so what sort of cases
Yeah.
they'll investigate, that sort of thing.
That's so
So that's
awesome.
going to be
Well,
my
I'm
third
excited. I'll be
pillar.
looking out for that for sure. It is an absolute pleasure to get to talk to creators, but this is one I've been excited about for a long time. So thank you again for being on, Colin. I'll include
Sure,
your
no problem.
links in our description and stuff, and everybody can check out Colin's work from By Odin's Beard. Check out Warden Saga, pick up a copy today, and this has been a blast. Thank you so much, Colin.
All right, no problem. Thanks for having me.